Chapter 1. The Silent Wolf. The granite radiated cold through the soles of her bare feet. Leora counted the heartbeats between the herald's declarations, letting the ritual words wash over her like water over river stones, meaningless, worn smooth by repetition. The accused did knowingly conspire with foreign agents to compromise the integrity of the royal bloodline. She had never seen a foreign agent. She had never left the palace grounds since her arrival 3 years past. The charges were theater, and she was the only audience who mattered. Velen moved around the dais, testing each chain's mechanism with practiced hands. The iron links chimed against the silver inlaid rings, bolted into the stone. Those rings polished by generations of bodies she would never meet. Other silence, other defectives, other nothingnesses the kingdom had swallowed. The accused did defy the Purity Codex, failing to reveal her condition to proper authorities upon binding. Her condition. The words landed like a slap, though her face remained still. She had been 6 years old when her father's household forced the toxin down her throat. She had been 6 years old when the silver burns began scarring over her throat, when her voice curled inward and died like a bird with broken wings. The defect had been manufactured, then discovered, then punished, all in the same night. The herald's voice droned on. Above the tribune balconies, the moon climbed higher, fat and silver and indifferent. Leora watched it through the smoke curling from the braziers, the bitter sage scent coating her tongue. She had not shifted since the poisoning. The wolf inside her had gone silent, locked behind silver and ritual and her father's ambition. Velen paused beside her, close enough that she could smell the forge smoke clinging to his leather apron. His hand hovered near her bound wrists, close but not touching. "Forgive me," he murmured, so soft she almost missed it. Her breath caught. The sound that escaped was small, wounded, a thread of something that might have been song if she'd allowed it. She swallowed it back down, the way she had learned to swallow everything. He stepped away. The chains settled against her skin, cold and heavy and final. The accused will be made silent forever, as the law demands. The herald's voice rose, ceremonial and cold. Leora stood motionless on the dais, the moon her only witness, and waited for the rehearsal to end. The dormitory settled into its nightly ritual of erasure. Leora knelt at her pallet, the third from the western wall, always the third, and folded her hands across her thighs. Spine curved, shoulders drawn inward, she made herself the smallest shape her body could hold. Around her, 39 other silents moved through the prescribed choreography. A girl 2 pallets over smoothed her straw with mechanical precision. An older woman, branded across her collarbone, shoulders rigid with old pain, lay down and turned her face to the wall. No one spoke. Speech meant the whip. Speech meant Corvus descending from his catwalk with leather singing through the air. The overseer paced above them, boots hollow on the wooden planks. His scars caught the tallow candlelight, a web of pale lines across his neck, his jaw, the back of one hand. He had been a silent once, or so the rumors went, promoted for his zealotry. Now he moved between the rows like a predator counting sheep, his eyes cataloging every twitch, every exhaled breath that rose too visibly in the cold air. A newer girl, barely 14, still wearing the confusion of recent arrival, began to hum. Just a thread of sound, barely audible, but enough. 2 silents nearest her turned in unison, their gazes locked on hers with the precision of a snare. The message traveled without words. Stop. Now. Before he hears. The girl's humming died. Her face flushed the color of old rust. She curled tighter into herself. Corvus reached the far end of the dormitory, his ledger open, counting heads against the roster. His back was turned. Leora's lips parted. The song emerged not as breath, but as vibration, a melody that lived in her bones, in the space between her ribs where the wolf had gone silent. The words were Fenlander, the dialect of marshlands and moonrise, a language that belonged to the self she had been before the poisoning, before the chains. Moorland calls, silver bleeds, I am here, I am more. The dormitory held its breath. 40 silence froze mid-movement, mid-thought, suspended in the 30 seconds of her singing. The melody was so faint that Corvus would hear only if he listened, and he was not listening. He was writing names in his ledger, methodical and bored. Leora sang of a self that existed beyond these walls, a self that had not been burned away, a self that remembered the taste of heather and the weight of her own heartbeat. A chain rattled. One of the iron staples bolted into the baseboard shifted as a sleeping Silent turned in her sleep. Corvus's head lifted. Leora swallowed the song mid-breath. It died in her throat like a bird shot from the sky. She lowered her gaze to the straw beneath her knees and became stone again. Shoulders hunched, hands folded, a girl made of nothing but the space she tried not to occupy. Corvus waited. The ledger hung open in his scarred hands. His eyes moved across the dormitory, searching for the source of the disturbance. The hour had turned late when the sound reached them, a resonance that traveled through stone and timber, through the careful architecture of silence. Boots. Many boots, and not the measured tread of night watch guards. Corvus's head snapped toward the dormitory entrance. His ledger snapped shut. The doors burst open not with the usual violence of overseer rounds, but with the calculated precision of authority. Torchlight spilled across the straw pallets in jagged columns, illuminating dust motes and the glint of iron. The silence did not move. To look was to invite punishment. They had been trained in this erasure longer than they had been trained in anything. King Kalen Varen entered first. His presence transformed the space the way fire transforms a frozen lake, cracking its surface, revealing the depth beneath. He wore no crown, no ceremonial armor, just black leathers and a wolf-gray cloak, the moon iron signet catching the torchlight as he moved between the rows. His ice-blue eyes took in the chamber with the methodical discomfort of a soldier surveying a battlefield after the slaughter. Behind him, 3 guards and a steward whose face had gone pale as ash. Corvus descended from his catwalk, his boots striking the steps with the rapid rhythm of a man whose carefully constructed world had just begun to collapse. He bowed, low, ceremonial, practiced. "Your Majesty, this is an unexpected honor. The low hearth is not a venue suited to—" "Quiet." Kalen's voice carried no volume, yet it filled the room. He had not raised it. He had not needed to. The silence remained motionless. 40 bodies arranged in 40 small surrenders. No one looked up. Looking up was invitation. Looking up was pain. Kalen moved between the pallets, his gaze sweeping across the space with the precision of a man who had learned to read terrain. He noted the chains looped through iron staples, the ventilation slits, barely wide enough for a hand, the scent of old lye and vinegar that clung to everything, the smell of forced cleanliness, of washing away evidence. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He paused at the 3rd pallet from the western wall. The girl knelt there, hands folded across her thighs, shoulders curved inward. A posture of erasure, a posture of survival. Her head was bowed, her hair cropped ragged against her skull, but something in the line of her shoulders told him she was not sleeping. She was not resting. She was holding herself perfectly, terribly still, and she was trembling. Corvus stepped forward, his voice sliding into the rehearsed cadence of a man who had given this explanation before. "The silents are contentedly housed, Your Majesty, well fed by the standards of their condition. Their silence ensures palace tranquility. Any disruption to their routine—" Her name. Kalen did not turn. His eyes remained on the trembling girl. Corvus's mouth opened, closed. "She is designated by number, Your Majesty. The silents are not given." "Her name." A pause. The torchlight crackled. Somewhere in the far corner, a silent pressed her face deeper into the wall. "Leora." The word escaped before Corvus could stop it. "Leora Thorne." Kaelin crouched. The movement was wrong. Kings did not crouch before the defective, did not lower themselves to the level of the silenced. The steward made a small sound of protest. One of the guards shifted uneasily. But Kaelin's descent continued until he was level with the girl's kneeling form. He was not supposed to touch. The Purity Codex was clear. Contact with the defective invited contamination. Their brokenness could spread. He touched her anyway. His fingers found the edge of her shift, the rough linen worn thin by years of washing. He lifted it, just enough to see. The scars ran from her throat down her spine in a lattice of silver, not the crude brands of shame that marked some silence, but the deliberate surgical sears of someone who had been carved into silence, burned, again and again, to ensure the wolf stayed silent, to ensure she stayed small. Leora flinched. It was not the flinching of a beaten animal, though she had been beaten. It was not the recoil of a creature expecting pain, though pain had been her constant companion. It was something else, a tremor that ran through her like a current finding ground, violent enough that the chain around her ankle clanged against the stone floor. Kaelin's hand stilled. In the silence that followed, he heard her breath. Faster now, not the shallow pants of fear, but something sharper, something that carried recognition, as if she knew somehow that this presence did not belong to the dormitory's cruelty, as if she had been waiting for a different kind of touch all her life. Who inflicted these? The question hung in the air like a blade. Corvus's face performed a complicated negotiation with itself. "Self-inflicted, Your Majesty, a sign of the defective's own broken nature. The silents often harm themselves in confusion. Nothing palace-sanctioned. We maintain order here. We maintain—" Kaelin stood. The movement was fluid, unhurried, but it carried the weight of a man who had ended border wars with the same economy of motion. He turned to face Corvus, and something in his expression shifted, hardened, became the face he wore in battle. "Remove her shackles." Corvus blinked. "Your Majesty." "Now." Kaelin's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "She is remanded to the Obsidian Sanatorium for assessment. Any resistance will be met with treason charges." The guards moved before Corvus could respond. One of them knelt beside Leora's pallet, unlocking the chain around her ankle with hands that trembled slightly. The iron fell away. The sound it made striking the stone floor was very small, very final. Leora rose unsteadily. For the first time, she met the king's eyes. What passed between them was not words. It was not the mate bond that the song spoke of, that instant recognition of belonging. It was simpler than that, sharper. It was the moment of being seen, truly seen, not as a number, not as a defect, not as a thing to be managed. And the terror that came with it was greater than any terror she had known before. She did not speak. She could not speak. But her eyes held his, and in them was a question that neither of them could yet name. The corridor stretched before them like a throat. Tapestries of wolf hunts lined the walls, their threads dulled by centuries of torch smoke. Silver-furred beasts tore at stag, at man, at each other. The glory of the hunt rendered in fading crimson and bone white. Leora kept her eyes on the floor. The stone was worn smooth by centuries of feet, and she measured her own steps against theirs, making herself no heavier than the ghosts who had walked here before. Kaelin walked beside her. He did not touch her. He did not speak. But she felt his presence like a pressure against her skin, not threatening, but vast. The kind of stillness that belonged to men who had commanded armies and learned to let silence do the work of orders. The guards flanked them, their boots sharp against the stone, 2 ahead, 2 behind, an honor guard or a prison escort. She could not tell the difference anymore. Perhaps there was none. Your name. His voice was low, not demanding, asking. Leora's throat tightened. The words were there. They had always been there, lodged beneath the scar tissue like seeds too stubborn to die. But speaking felt like a trap. Every word she had ever spoken in her father's house had been used as proof of her defectiveness. Every sound had earned her another lesson in silence. She said nothing. Kaelin did not press. He simply walked, matching his pace to her shuffling step. He was patient in a way she did not recognize. Men like him did not wait. Men like him took. "Are you in pain?" The question landed somewhere in her chest. She wanted to laugh. Could a body so scarred still register pain, or had it simply forgotten how to feel anything but? Her silence was answer enough. They passed a window. Moonlight fell across the corridor in a pale blade, and for a moment Leora saw her shadow stretch before her, a thin, ragged thing, but a shadow nonetheless. She had not cast one in the dormitory. They had made her small enough to disappear. Ahead, a door waited. Moon-silver inlay coiled across its surface in patterns that might have been scripture or might have been art. Wolves and more wolves, endless, their silver jaws open in a howl that seemed to pull at something deep in the hollow of her chest. Kaelin stopped. The guards stopped with him, their hands falling from their hilts. "From this point forward," Kaelin said, "no one enters without permission from me or the healer within. Is that clear?" The guards exchanged a glance. This was not the voice of a king making polite request. This was the voice of a man who had rewritten the rules of a corridor in real time, who had taken a space the Purity Codex declared public and made it sacred. "Crystal, Your Majesty." They nodded. They stepped back. Kaelin's hand found the door. The silver caught the torchlight, blazed briefly, and the door swung inward. The air changed. Juniper. Honey. Dried herbs and earth, and something else. Something clean. Something that belonged to the living. Leora's breath caught. She had forgotten that air could smell like this. She had forgotten that places could be made for comfort rather than correction. She stepped across the threshold. The chamber opened before her. A bed piled with quilts the color of forest moss, a hearth cold but waiting, shelves lined with bottles and bandages and books. A window looked out over the city, over the mountains beyond, over a world that suddenly seemed less like a cage. Kaelin paused at the doorway. His eyes found hers one last time. What lived in them was not pity. It was not the hot, hungry gaze of a man who saw a prize. It was something quieter, something that looked like a promise he had not yet learned to speak. "Your scars are not your shame." His voice was low, almost gentle. "Whoever told you otherwise lied." He closed the door behind him. Leora stood alone in the warmth, her shadows falling around her like a second skin, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not know what to do with her hands. Chapter 2. The Hollow's Unspooling. The door had not closed behind the king before the shadows shifted. Leora saw it happen, the way the darkness in the far corner of the chamber seemed to thicken, to gather itself, to become something other than absence. A figure emerged from the obsidian wall itself, though that was impossible. The stone was seamless, and yet, the woman who stepped into the moonlight falling through the oculus was ancient. Not frail, something about her bearing spoke of endurance that had outlasted empires. But old in the way mountains were old. Her skin was deep umber, her locks silver white and beaded with small bones that clicked softly as she moved. Her eyes caught the moonbeam and held it, amber and wolfish and utterly unafraid. She wore shawls layered over shawls, and her hands, ink dark with sigils, hung at her sides like tools of a trade older than the kingdom itself. "You are trembling." The voice was slow, water over stone, unhurried, certain. Leora did not step back. There was nowhere to go, and something in the woman's stillness told her that running would be pointless. This was not a threat. This was something else. The woman moved to the stone table in the room's center and set down a leather satchel. Her movements were ritualized, precise, the way a priest might arrange sacred instruments before a rite. The king has broken protocol. She did not look at Leora. That means either he is desperate or he sees something the palace needs to see. Either way, your suffering has become political. A pause. She turned, and her amber eyes found Leora's gray-green ones. "That is both your danger and your only weapon." Leora's throat tightened. The words slid past her defenses like knives through silk. She had spent years making herself invisible, making herself nothing, and now a stranger was telling her that her pain had weight, that it could be used. The woman reached into her satchel and withdrew a vial. The liquid inside caught the moonlight and shimmered, iridescent, alive, the color of oil on water. "Do you know what this is?" Leora shook her head. "It is what will save you or kill you, depending on how much poison your body can bear to release." The woman uncorked the vial, and the scent that rose from it was sharp. Wolf's bane and silver leaf and something bitter underneath. "You were not born silent, child. You were poisoned. At your first shift's eve, someone force-fed you a toxin sealed in ritual wine. It locked your wolf in place and has been eating you from within ever since." The chamber tilted. Leora's legs buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the stone table, fingers scraping against cold black glass, and for a moment she could not breathe, could not think. The words hung in the air like smoke, and she wanted to deny them, wanted to claw them out of existence, but some part of her, some small, buried part, had always known, had always felt the wrongness curled inside her like a second spine. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper, rust and ruin, but it was the first sound she had spoken aloud in years. The woman's expression did not change. "Because your father feared you more than he loved you. Because the Purity Codex rewards the erasure of those who might challenge power. Because the strongest wolves are the ones they fear most, so they made sure you would never shift." Leora collapsed. The chair caught her, or perhaps she caught the chair. She did not remember sitting. Her body was shaking now, a fine tremor that started in her hands and worked its way inward, as if her bones had decided to abandon her. The woman! Moonsworn, Leora realized she was one of the last moonsworn, kneeled before her. The vial pressed to Leora's lips. "Drink. It will be terrible, but it will be truth." The liquid tasted of copper and starlight and violation. Within minutes, Leora was shaking, vomiting, purging poison that had lived in her blood since childhood. The wretches came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had not known existed, and each one dragged something black and viscous from her body. The woman held her hair back, held her steady, said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. When the worst passed, when Leora slumped against the chair, sweat-soaked and hollowed out, the woman spoke again. "I have tried to save others like you. Girls poisoned, burned, taught that they are less than. Most died in the low hearth." She paused, and something flickered in her amber eyes. Not grief, but its older cousin, weariness. "I survived by outlasting. You will survive by choosing otherwise." She pressed a cloth to Leora's face, wiping the sweat and the bile and the evidence of what had been done to her. "Now," the woman said, "breathe." 3 days passed like water through cracked glass. Leora woke each morning to light falling through the oculus above. a shaft of pale gold that traced slow arcs across the chamber walls as the sun climbed. She ate what the healers brought: thin broth, dark bread, bitter tea that tasted of bark and patience. Her body, though still frail, no longer felt like a cage. The poison was leaving. With it went the numbness that had armored her for so long, and in its place came something sharper, more present. Pain, yes, but also awareness. She could hear birds outside. She could smell the pine resin in the window joints. She could feel the texture of the sheets against her skin, and each sensation arrived like a small miracle, a reminder that she was still breathing. On the third morning, the door opened. King Cailan entered. He wore no crown, no ceremonial cloak, only dark leathers and the moon iron signet on his thumb. Under his arm he carried a sheaf of documents sealed with black wax. His face was carved from something harder than stone, and Leora recognized the expression from the dormitory, the mask of a man preparing to deliver news that would shatter. He stopped at the foot of her bed. "You look better." Not a question, an observation delivered in that measured tone of his. "The healers say the poison is nearly gone from your blood." Leora inclined her head. She had not spoken since that first whispered word with the Moonsworn, had not needed to. The king did not seem to require speech from her. He filled silences the way fire filled hearths, naturally, completely. He set the documents on the stone table. Did not sit. "I ordered an investigation." His voice dropped, the words precise as blade work. "Into the scarring, into the whispered accusations that palace labor was operating beyond its legal remit." Leora watched him, waited. Cross-referencing records proved illuminating. He broke the first seal. The parchment that slid free was old. The ink faded to rust. 47 silents have died in the past decade under circumstances marked as natural causes. Falls, fevers, a woman who choked on her own tongue in her sleep. He paused. The pattern is not difficult to read. Something cold moved through Leora's chest. 47. She had not known them. All their names had been stripped away like hers, but she had seen their palettes, felt the absence when they did not return from the low hearth. Cailan produced another document. This one was fresher, the ink still dark. He unfolded it slowly, and Leora saw her own name written in the margin. Adjacent to it, a series of notations, dates, quantities, a signature at the bottom, pressed in red wax, her father's seal, the thorned wolf of House Thorn, unmistakable. "The orders for the detoxification poison," Cailan said. "The very substance that has been coursing through your system since childhood, signed by Lord Garin Thorn, sometime justiciar of the Purity Courts." The chamber contracted. Leora stared at the document, at the handwriting she had seen 1,000 times on summons and decrees, and the letters that had declared her dead before she was even born. Her father's script, his mark, his choice. "He poisoned you." Cailan's voice was flat, final, not a question. Fact delivered with the weight of a sword. Not some distant hand, not some anonymous cruelty. Your father signed the order himself. Leora's hands curled into fists against the sheets. For years, she had believed her silence was her own failure, that she was broken before she was born, defective, less than, that the scars were evidence of what she was, not what had been done to her. Now she understood. Her father had chosen this. Her father had looked at the wolf rising in his daughter and elected to smother it, had signed documents and sealed decrees and continued breathing, eating, ruling while she rotted in the dark. The political danger is considerable. Cailan's tone shifted, still hard but threaded now with something that might have been warning. If I move against a noble house without clear grounds, I risk schism. The High Chancellor has already circulated quiet objections. Garen Thorne is a pillar of the purity courts. Undermining him might destabilize the legal order. Leora looked up, met his ice-blue eyes. But if you can testify, he continued, if your body can be presented as evidence, then the conspiracy becomes undeniable. They will challenge every word. They will make you choose between your family name and your life. A pause. They will try to kill you. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Leora's voice, when it came, was steady. Not the rusty whisper of before, but something clearer, harder, forged in the fire of what she had just learned. My family killed me already. She held his gaze. They just didn't do it all at once. The chamber smelled of iron and old stone. No windows, just walls that had absorbed centuries of pain and turned it to silence. Isolde had cleared the space herself, dragging the furniture out into the corridor, leaving only the bare floor and the faint light that filtered through the high grate. On your feet. Leora rose from the pallet. Her legs trembled, not from exertion, but from the simple fact of standing. 3 days of broth and rest had not undone years of deprivation. Her arms hung at her sides, shoulders curved inward, the posture of a woman who had learned that taking up space was dangerous. Isolde circled her, slow, assessing. The moonsworn moved like water over stone. Nothing wasted, every motion deliberate. The wolf will not come. Isolde's voice was flat. Even with the poison clearing, the suppression runs deep. Years of silence have calcified around your shift. You may never feel the moon's call again. Leora said nothing. She had known this already. The absence in her chest was not new. It had simply grown quieter, more familiar, like a wound that stopped hurting only because the nerve had died. That is not what I am teaching you. Isolde stopped in front of her. Hands up, guard position. Leora raised her fists. The posture felt absurd. Her arms were thin, her knuckles sharp beneath skin that had never known a fighting callus. Isolde struck. Not hard, a testing tap against her forearm, but Leora's arms dropped anyway, her body folding inward, the old reflex surging up. Absorb, endure, survive. Again. Isolde struck the other side. Leora flinched but held position this time. Then the third strike came, and she folded again, shoulders curling to shield her face. Isolde stepped back. You keep waiting for the wolf to save you. The old woman's voice carried no warmth. But you are not a wolf right now. You are a woman, and women survive by being smarter than the things that hunt them. Leora's jaw tightened. She raised her hands again. Isolde came at her faster this time, a flurry of strikes that Leora couldn't track, couldn't anticipate. She caught one on her shoulder and let the others land on her arms, her ribs, the soft tissue of her sides. Each blow she absorbed like a sack of grain, letting her body absorb the impact rather than deflect it. Enough. Isolde stepped back, breathing hard. Stop. Leora lowered her arms. Her whole body ached, but beneath the ache something else stirred, something that felt almost like shame. What are you doing? Protecting you, Leora gasped. The words came out rough, unpracticed. You are my teacher. I should not know. Isolde's voice cracked like a whip. You are choosing to be hurt so that I have nothing to feel guilty about. That is not protection. That is complicity with your own erasure. The words landed. Leora stared at her. The old woman's amber eyes held no pity, only the hard clarity of someone who had seen this pattern 1,000 times and refused to let it stand. You were taught that your pain was currency, Isolde continued, that your silence bought safety, that being small made you valuable. But you are not small. You have never been small. They made you believe it so they could own you. Leora's breath came ragged. Her hands shook. Again. Isolde raised her fists. This time, when I strike, you move, you redirect, you make me work for it." The first blow came. Leora saw it coming, actually saw it track the trajectory, felt her body remember what her mind had forgotten. She twisted. The strike glanced off her shoulder instead of landing clean. Better. The second came low. She stepped aside, let it pass. Her footwork was clumsy, graceless, but it was movement instead of stillness. The third came fast, straight for her face. Leora dropped, swept her leg, and felt the shock of contact as her foot connected with Isolt's ankle. Not enough to fell the old woman, but enough. Enough. She stumbled back, gasping. Her heart slammed against her ribs. And somewhere in her chest, beneath the absence where the wolf should have been, something else was waking. Not a howl. Not a transformation. Just the simple, startling recognition that she had struck back. Her laugh came out broken. Half a sob, half a sound she didn't have a name for. She had never felt her own power before. Never known it was there to feel. Isolde rose from where she had caught herself. The old woman's face was unreadable. "Again," she said. The chamber smelled of iron and moonflower. Leora sat on the edge of the stone table while Isolde examined the vial in her hand. One final test, one last confirmation. "Clear," the old woman said. "The poison is gone from your blood entirely." Leora exhaled. She had expected relief. Instead, she felt only the familiar hollow where something should have been. But the ceiling remains. Isolde set the vial down. Not toxic anymore. The poison burned itself out, but embedded. The wolf is still locked in place. 13 years of suppression have calcified the shift. Even now, with the toxin gone, your wolf cannot emerge. Then it is done. Leora's voice was flat. "I will always be what they made me." "No." Isolde turned to face her. "There are two paths. The first—" She paused, as though the words themselves were heavy. "The ceiling can be broken, but the wolf will emerge wounded, feral. It will take years to integrate what was torn from you at first shift's eve. You will suffer. There is no guarantee you will survive it intact." Leora said nothing. "Or," Isolde continued, "you can choose a different way. You can become Luna." The word hung in the air. Leora had heard the old stories. Luna, the chosen wolf, the one who rose not from blood but from will. A wolf that was never sealed because it was never inherited. What does that mean? It means the wolf rises from choice, not nature. Isolde's amber eyes held hers. It means accepting that you were never defective. You were hunted. And a hunted thing, when it finally turns and faces the hunter, becomes something new. The door opened. Kalen entered, his face unreadable, his wolf-gray cloak catching the moonlight from the oculus above. He had been listening from the corridor. Leora realized he had heard everything. "If we move forward with prosecution," he said, stepping into the chamber, "your father will use every legal tool to destroy you. He will claim you were always unstable, always dangerous. He will demand the death sentence." "Even as king?" Leora asked. "Especially as king." Kalen's voice was quiet. "Because if I overrule the courts, I become a tyrant. And a tyrant's mercy is not justice. It is just power wearing a different mask." The weight of it settled over her. She was being asked to testify knowing she might die for it. She was being asked to choose her own voice over her own life. She looked at Kylan, then at Isolde, then at her own scarred hands, the hands that had learned to strike back, that had learned to endure, that had never been her own. "I choose," Leora said. "I choose to speak. I choose to be seen. And if they kill me for it, at least I will die as myself, not as ash." The moon through the oculus seemed to brighten. Isolde reached across the stone table and placed her hand over Leora's. "Then we prepare for war," Isolde said. The office of the High Chancellor smelled of vellum and myrrh, the scent of old power preserved in ink. Marin Kest stood at his window, watching the courtyard below where servants hurried between duties, before turning to face the door as Lord Garin Thorne entered. The Fenlander noble moved like a man who had already won his case. His dark velvets bore the silver thread insignia of the justiciar's office, and his hawkish face held the expression of one who had spent decades learning to appear incensed rather than afraid. "You summoned me," Garin said, skipping the formal bow. "I trust you have good reason to interrupt my estate's harvest." "Sit down, Lord Thorne." Marin gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Your daughter has been removed from the correction house." "I am aware." Garin lowered himself into the chair, crossing one leg over the other. "The king has taken a liking to damaged goods. It is uncharacteristic of him. It is political." Marin settled behind his desk, fingers steepled. "She has been moved to the Obsidian Sanatorium. She is being treated, and she is being prepared to testify." The casual elegance faltered. "Testify to what?" "To the poisoning, to the scarring, to the orders you signed." Marin slid a document across the desk, copies of the investigation findings, the death records, the ledger entries that traced 47 silents to unmarked graves. "If she speaks, the Purity Courts face scrutiny they have never faced, and you, Lord Thorne, face the executioner's blade." Garin's jaw tightened, but his voice remained ice. "Then we discredit her. We claim she was always unstable, a liability to the crown. We find evidence of her conspiring with foreign powers. There must be some Fenland dissidents willing to swear she was in contact. The king will protect her." Marin shook his head. "He has already signaled his shield. He believes her." "Belief is fragile." Garin's smile was thin and cold. "Not if she betrays him first." Marin leaned back. "Explain." "We have foreign envoys willing to offer substantial aid to certain border lords if they will press the king to distance himself from the creature." Garin rose, pacing toward the window. "We have agents in the palace who will ensure assassination attempts that will be traced to her. We create the narrative that she is a danger to the realm, a broken thing trying to claw her way to power, and once the people turn on her, even the king cannot save her." The Chancellor understood then. The conspiracy was not just to silence Leora, it was to make her silencing seem justified, necessary. The Purity Codex would not be challenged, it would be vindicated. "You are certain the timeline allows this?" 3 weeks. Garin turned from the window. 3 weeks for the groundwork, then a public accusation, a trial, and an execution that will serve as final proof that the Purity Codex works exactly as intended. Marin rose and extended his hand. "Then we have an understanding." Garin grasped it. "We do." The gardens offered a cruel kind of freedom. Stone paths wound through trimmed hedges and silver bell fountains, but every archway cast shadows where guards stood watch, and every turn revealed another pair of eyes that followed Leora's movement, like prey learning to pace its cage. Isolde walked beside her, one hand resting on the pommel of a cane that Leora suspected concealed a blade. The old healer had not left her side since the sanatorium, and something in that constancy made the walls feel less like a prison and more like a shield. "The roses were my mother's," Isolde said, nodding toward a bed of deep crimson blooms. "She tended them before the Purity Courts burned the moon-sworn groves. I have not seen them flower in 30 years. Leora opened her mouth to respond. Then the air changed. A figure dropped from the colonnade above. Metal caught the afternoon light. The blade's arc swept toward Leora's throat with the precision of someone who had killed before and would kill again. Isolde moved. The healer's hand closed around Leora's collar, yanking her downward with a strength that belied her stooped frame. Steel sang past where Leora's neck had been and bit into her shoulder instead, a hot line of fire that sent her stumbling into the gravel path. The assassin recoiled, adjusting for a second strike. Guards erupted from every entrance. Black armored forms flooded the garden with drawn swords, surrounding the attacker before he could recover his footing. One guard kicked the blade from his grip. Another slammed him face first into the stone fountain's edge. "Hold!" The commanding voice belonged to a captain Leora recognized from the king's detail. "By order of the crown, hold him alive!" The assassin struggled, blood streaming from his temple. "She is marked," he spat. "The defective is marked for termination." Isolde helped Leora to her feet, pressing a hand to the wound to stanch the bleeding. Her amber eyes never left the prisoner. "By whom?" the captain demanded. The assassin laughed, a wet, broken sound. "A Fenland merchant. Thorn's coin buys many blades." The words landed like a sentence. That evening, Kaelin found Leora in her chamber, shoulder bandaged, staring at the report spread across the desk. His face carried the weight of someone who had expected the blow and still could not stop it from landing. "These are circulating through the capital," he said, placing another sheet beside the others. "Whispers that you were brought here as an assassination vector, that you have seduced me into compromising my judgment, that the defective now threatens my crown." Leora read the words without reading them. The letters blurred into a single truth. She was the weapon they had always claimed she was, just not in the way they had accused. "They will not stop," she said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, hollowed out. "If I stay, they will use me to destroy you." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "Then you stay protected." "Protected?" She met his gaze. "The attempt proves I am a liability. Every day I remain in these walls, you become the king who chose a broken thing over his people." The silence that followed was worse than the blade. She considered it then, fleeing. The servants' passage, the forgotten gate, the darkness beyond the walls where hunters would have to track her through the very wilds her family had once owned. She could disappear. She could make herself small again, invisible, harmless. She could save him. Running now means they win. Isolde stood in the doorway, shawls settled around her shoulders like armor. Her amber eyes caught Leora's and held them. "They will hunt you," the healer continued, stepping into the chamber. "They will make you a monster in every story. Your only weapon is to walk toward them with your head high and let them see that their poison could not break you." The obsidian glass turned the night into a mirror. Leora pressed her palm against its surface, watching her own reflection stare back. Gaunt, silvered with scars, a woman who had learned to survive by becoming invisible. The door opened behind her. She did not turn. She knew his footsteps now, the measured cadence of a king who moved like a soldier even in peace. "They have made their move," Kaelin said. His voice carried the flatness of someone delivering a death sentence. "The High Chancellor has officially demanded your surrender. Charges of conspiracy against the crown, attempted corruption of a noble house, practice of forbidden moonsworn rituals." Leora's hand dropped from the glass. She turned. "If you surrender," Kaelin continued, "I can offer you a fair trial. But they will use every advantage. Your own father will testify against you. The courts will be stacked. The words should have cut. Instead, they landed like old wounds, already scarred over, already known. What if I run? Kaelin's face did not flicker, but something in his bearing shifted, a tension that ran deeper than politics. Then I lose legitimacy for protecting a fugitive. The realm fractures. Wars break out at the border because strength is perceived as weakness. Thousands die for one person's safety. He paused. And you will spend your life hunted. He moved closer. Not the measured approach of a king to a subject. Something else entirely. the stride of a man who had stopped calculating protocol and started calculating only her. "There is a third path," he said. "You surrender to trial. You speak truth in front of witnesses. You force the realm to hear what was done to you, and I will remake the law around what they hear." Leora shook her head. "You cannot do that. You told me yourself. You cannot overrule the courts without becoming a tyrant." "No," Kaelin agreed, "but I can make the courts face the consequence of their own logic. If they convict you of crimes of nature, then they are admitting that the Purity Codex itself is a crime. If they execute you for being broken, they are admitting they break things deliberately. They will contradict themselves into powerlessness." She understood then. He was asking her to be the mirror. "And if they convict me anyway?" He did not look away. He did not soften the blow with comfort. "Then I will burn the Purity Codex and remake the law with my own hands. And I will do it for you, not because I am a just king, but because I love you and I choose you over the order I inherited." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something Leora had no name for, something that settled in her chest like the first warmth after long winter. She said yes. The Chancellor's face reddened. "Your Majesty, this proceeding has exceeded—" "Exceeded what?" Kaelin's voice cut through the plaza like a blade. "The bounds of comfortable lies? The timeline of your preferred narrative?" The crowd shifted. Murmurs became a tide, then a roar, then something between, thousands of breath held in anticipation of which way the wind would blow. Isolde stepped forward, her silver locks catching the noon light. She carried a leather satchel, old and cracked, and from it she withdrew a sheaf of documents. "The formula for the soul-sealing toxin," she said, holding the first page aloft. "Derived from moonily extract refined with silver dust, administered in wine at the child's first shift's eve. I found it in the Justiciar's archives, copies of copies, but enough to match the poison still lingering in her blood." She produced another. "Invoices from House Thorne's estate, silver rods custom-ordered to the exact gauge used in purity branding, delivered 3 months before Lord Garen's daughter was declared defective." A gasp rippled through the nearest spectators. "And these." Isolde pulled free a bundle of brittle parchment, the edges blackened with age. Testimonies. 17 silents who survived the Thorne estate, 12 who did not, all of them branded, all of them fed the same poison. Garen rose from his seat. "These are forgeries, the ravings of a heretical—" "Shall I read their names?" Isolde's voice did not rise. It did not need to. Mira of House Ashworth, sold to the Eastern Correction House, dead within a year. Corin of the Northern Flats, returned to his family in a box. "Shall I continue, Lord Justiciar? Or would you prefer I name the children?" Garen's mouth snapped shut. His hands gripped the railing of the witness box until his knuckles whitened. The physician who had been called to testify shifted on his feet. He looked at Leora's scars, really looked perhaps for the first time, and something in his expression crumbled. "These marks," he said slowly, "are consistent with purity branding. I have seen them before, on the dead." The plaza erupted. Kaelin raised a hand. The noise did not stop, not entirely, but it dimmed to a rumble. "The court will recess," he said. 2 hours. The prosecution may present its remaining evidence. The defense—" He looked at Leora, at her bared scars, at the way she stood despite the chains, despite the weight of 1,000 stairs. "The defense will prepare its response." He did not look at Garen as he spoke. He did not need to. The guards moved forward to escort Leora from the dais. She walked between them, her back straight, the cold air against her scars, feeling like something other than shame, like proof. Chapter 3. The Howl That Rewrites Law. The verdict echoed across the square like a bell tolling for the old world. Guilty on all counts. Garin Thorne did not scream. He did not weep. He stood in the witness box with the stillness of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome and found this one acceptable. Barely. The exile would strip his title, but exile could be survived. He would write letters from the borderlands. He would cultivate sympathizers. The Thorne name would rise again. Leora watched him being led away. His eyes met hers for a single instant, and in them she saw no remorse, only calculation, only the cold certainty that he had lost a battle, not the war. The crowd roared. Thousands of voices united in a sound that should have felt like vindication. Kalen stood at the high balcony, his hand raised, acknowledging the verdict. The afternoon sun caught his face, and for a moment he looked like the hero of the story the bards would sing, the righteous king who had torn down the corrupt order and freed the innocent. Leora felt none of it. She stood in the center of the plaza, her shift clean, her scars visible, her body her own for the first time in years. The court had called her victim. The law had called her whole. The crowd had called for her freedom. But Mara was still dead. The girl who had shared her pallet, who had taught her to fold herself small enough to survive, who had whispered Fenlander lullabies in the dark. Mira had died in the low hearth of a fever that was never a fever, of causes listed as natural on documents no one would ever read. The trial had named her in testimony, but the verdict had not resurrected her. It had not given her a grave with a marker. It had not undone the moment when Leora had heard the ragged breathing stop next to her and known that silence had claimed another victim. The guards approached to escort her from the dais. Leora moved toward the steps, her bare feet against the sun-warmed stone. The stone struck her shoulder before she saw it coming. "Defective!" The word split the air. A woman in the crowd, plain dressed, not noble, her face twisted with something that looked like fury, but Leora recognized as terror, stood with her arm still extended. "You may have fooled the king," the woman shouted, "but you are still broken. You will never be one of us." The stones began to fall. Not everywhere, not the whole crowd, but enough. A rain of small rocks and epithets aimed at the scars visible through her shift, at the body that would never shift, at the girl who had dared to stand in the sun and claim worth. Guards formed a wall. Kalen's voice cut through the chaos, ordering dispersal, but Leora raised her hand. "Wait." The word came out softer than she intended, but somehow the crowd heard it. The stones stopped, or almost stopped, a scattering of them still landing harmlessly on the flagstones. Leora looked at the faces, the woman who had thrown first, the men beside her, the children on their parents' shoulders, learning the shape of hatred before they could read. She saw fear there. Not the fear of enemies, but the fear of people who had built their lives on a hierarchy and watched it tremble. Without the purity codex, without the defectives to mark as less than, what were they? The law had called her victim, but the people had called her broken, and those were not the same thing. The trial had exposed the conspiracy. It had not exposed the belief. Leora lowered her hand. The guards held their position. The crowd waited. The victory was not false because it had not happened. It was false because it had happened exactly as the law allowed, and the law was not enough. The chamber held its darkness like a held breath. The oculus above showed nothing. No moon, no stars, just the void that came when the moon hid its face entirely. Leora had grown used to the silver light that filtered through during other phases, the way it painted the walls in pale blues and grays. This total blackness felt different, final. Isolde sat at the small table near the hearth, a cup of tea cooling in front of her. Bread lay beside it, untouched. The moon-sworn woman had not lit candles. She sat in the dark as if waiting for something. They will just hide it better. Leora's voice was flat, exhausted. "They will redefine the Codex using prettier language, and the next girl will still be poisoned. The next family will still choose erasure." Isolde did not argue. She had lived long enough to know that truth-telling was not salvation. It was just the precondition for a choice not yet made. The silence between them stretched. The door opened. Kaelin entered, visible only as a darker shade of darkness against the black. He had been in emergency councils with the regional lords, trying to shore up support for a new legal framework to replace the suspended Codex. His shoulders carried the weight of political exhaustion. Several lords are already demanding the Codex be reinstated. He did not bother with pleasantries. They argue that without it, the kingdom will fracture. That order requires hierarchy. That hierarchy requires a definition of the unacceptable. Leora turned from the wall where she had been standing. "What do you want?" The question hung in the darkness. Kaelin did not answer immediately. She heard him exhale, felt the moment he decided to speak truth. "I want you. I want a world where you are safe and valued and whole." His voice roughened. "But I cannot make that world by royal decree. I can only dismantle the old one and hope something better grows in its place." Leora stood. She moved to the black glass wall and pressed her palms against it, feeling the cold surface that had become familiar over weeks of recovery. Words had been building in her chest, pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. "I will not wait to see what grows." Her voice carried a new resolve. "I will not hope someone else makes me safe. I am done being patient. I am done being the evidence of their crime." "What are you saying?" Isolde asked. Leora turned. Her eyes were no longer haunted. They were alive with something fierce and unbroken. "I am saying I am going to break the seal myself. I am going to call the wolf. I am going to be the thing they told me I could never be." Isolde nodded slowly, her silver locks catching what little light the oculus offered. "You understand it will not be clean. The wolf that emerges will be wounded and feral. It will not heal for years." "I do not care." Leora's jaw tightened. "I have been broken and hidden long enough. Let me be broken and visible." Kaelin stepped forward, his hand reaching for her. "You do not have to do this alone." "I do." Leora caught his wrist, not pulling away but stopping him. Her expression held no cruelty, only certainty. "This is not your wound to heal. This is mine, and I will not let anyone else carry it." The plaza had never held so many bodies at dawn. Citizens pressed against the wolf head pylons, nobles clustered on tribunal balconies, merchants and guildsmen and common folk all gathered beneath a sky the color of fresh bruises. The herald's summons had carried through the capital like wildfire. "Come and witness. Come and see." Leora stood at the center of the dais, barefoot on pale granite veined with moon silver. No chains bound her. No guards stood at her back. Behind her, Kaelin remained in the king's box, though he had risen from his seat. Isolde moved to the platform's center, her silver locks catching the first light of sunrise. She did not ask permission. She did not wait for acknowledgement. The old language spilled from her lips, words older than the kingdom, older than the Codex, invocations of moon and blood and the wild self that dwelt beneath skin. Her voice rose and fell in patterns that made the air itself feel thicker, charged with something that had been sleeping for generations. Leora removed her shift. The crowd's murmur died. Her scars were no longer just wounds. They were marked now, moon-silver ink tracing patterns across her flesh. Names, every girl who had died in the low hearth, every silent who had been erased, inscribed in honor rather than shame, legible for all to see. She closed her eyes. The sealing poison in her blood activated, a final purge triggered by the ritual and by Leora's own will pressing down on years of suppression. Pain flooded through her. Her bones felt as though they were fracturing from within. Her breath came in gasps that became howls. Her body convulsed, her teeth elongated, her hands curved into claws. But this was no normal shift. She was caught between forms, neither fully human nor fully wolf, suspended in the space between what they had made her and what she was born to be. The crowd recoiled. Someone cried out that the defective had become a monster. Children were pulled against their parents' legs, faces hidden. Leora did not stop. She reached deeper, past the ceiling, past the poison, past every year of taught suppression. Her muscles screamed, her vision blurred, and then a sound emerged. Not the howl of a wolf born to be wolf. This was something else, a howl of something claiming itself against the order that tried to erase it. Part human voice, part animal cry, part something new entirely. A voice that refused to be silenced. It carried across the plaza, echoed off stone pylons, reached every ear in the capital. In that howl was every girl who had died nameless, every silent who had been taught their essence was defect, every person the Purity Codex had deemed disposable. Her form stabilized. She stood in the center of the dais, not caught between, but not quite either form. Something new. Luna. Her gray-green eyes had shifted to pure silver, luminous and fey. Her body remained human, but wolf light pulsed beneath her skin. Her scars glowed faintly, no longer marks of shame, but marks of survival, of testimony of power claimed through agony. She opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was fractured and beautiful, part growl, part song. I am not defective. I was hunted, and I am done hiding. The Purity Codex unmade itself, not through royal decree, but through witnessed impossibility. A girl poisoned at first shift's eve, held silent for years, who claimed herself despite every system designed to prevent it, now stood as walking refutation of the entire hierarchy. Lords rose to their feet, some in anger, some in awe, some in fear. High Chancellor Marin Kest looked as though his entire framework of law had become ash in his hands. Velen Pike stood frozen, mallet resting against his thigh. Then he lowered it. He walked away from the dais. For the first time in his service, he refused to strike again. Quaelin descended from the king's box and crossed the plaza, not approaching her as protector to protected, but as equal to equal. He knelt, not in supplication to a subordinate, but in acknowledgement of a power he did not command. The law dies today, he proclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of coronation. And a new one is born. Anyone deemed defective by the old Purity Codex is hereby declared free, owed restitution, and protected under penalties of death. Any use of sealing poison is crimes against the crown. Any labor under duress is slavery, and slavery carries execution. The hierarchy is broken. The kingdom will learn to live otherwise. But these were his words. The real law was Leora's howl, still echoing off the stone, still burning in the plaza, still remaking the realm with every repetition. Isolde stepped forward and placed her hand on Leora's shoulder. Welcome, Luna. You have killed the law that killed your sisters. Now comes the harder work, building something that does not eat its own. The garden's morning light painted everything in soft gold. Leora walked beside Kaelin, their steps unhurried. The howl had become legend already, songs spreading across the realm about the girl who shattered the Purity Codex with her own voice. But here, in this quiet space, those stories felt distant. The realm churned with change. Old nobles clung to their privileges like drowning swimmers grasping driftwood. New magistrates drafted laws without the scaffold of the Codex, fumbling towards something that had never existed. Foreign ambassadors requested audiences, their faces carefully neutral as they recalculated alliances with a kingdom that had inverted its entire order. Leora was still learning to be Luna, Some days the wolf prowled luminous beneath her skin, silver light tracing her scars like living silver thread. Other days, she was almost human again, the scars still there, but the silver light dimmed to a faint shimmer. She would never fully shift. The ceiling had been too profound, the years of suppression too long. She was something between, something new, and Isolde said that was rarer and more powerful than either form alone. Kaelin walked beside her. He was no longer quite a king, not because his authority had been stripped, but because he had chosen not to wield it in the old way. "They want me to execute your father," he said. The words fell quietly between them. "The people demand it. The courts would uphold it. I have the power." Leora was quiet for a long moment. Her bare feet felt the cool earth of the garden path. "Let him live," she said finally. Her voice was still that fractured, beautiful thing, part growl, part song. Let him live in exile, in a kingdom rebuilt without the purity system. Let him watch from the margins as the daughters he was terrified of become the architects of the new law. She looked at him. "That is a crueler mercy than death." Kaelin nodded. He had expected this answer. He had come to understand that Leora's power was not her fury. It was her capacity to refuse the cycle of violence, even when violence would be righteous. They walked in silence. Somewhere distant, a girl was learning to read, a silent from the low hearth, one of the few who survived, now being educated under the new mandates. Somewhere else, Isolde was teaching the moon-sworn rites openly, no longer heresy, but heritage. Somewhere, a child was born without the fear that a defect would be discovered and erased. Leora stopped at the garden's edge and looked back at the palace, at the place that had tried to erase her and failed. "I am not the hero of this story," she told Kaelin. "I am the beginning of one that will take centuries to write." "Then let us write it together," Kaelin said. Leora took his hand, not as a subject takes a king's, as an equal takes an equal's, and in that gesture the last old law died, and something new, fragile, strange, and true began.